A racist woman insults a black soldier on a plane, but when she watches the news the next day, she realizes she made a huge mistake. The morning at Chicago O'Hare International Airport was alive with the restless energy of travelers. Under the harsh glow of fluorescent lights, announcements echoed through the terminal, urging passengers to check their gates and belongings. The weather outside was wet and blustering, adding to the chaotic inside. At Gate High 19, people from all walks of life gathered. Families juggling strollers, business professionals in tailored suits, and students lugging oversized backpacks. The flight to Atlanta, originally scheduled for 10 a.m., had been delayed, creating waves of frustration among the crowd. Among the travelers was Hannah Clark, a polished corporate executive in her mid-30s. Dressed in a sleek navy blazer and pencil skirt, her blonde hair pulled back into a neat twist, Hannah exuded confidence and ambition. She anxiously tapped her high heels on the tiled floor, clutching her designer handbag and smartphone. Every few seconds, her screen lit up with emails and notifications, each demanding her attention. Hannah was headed to an important management conference, her sights set on securing a major promotion. As the overhead speaker crackled, announcing boarding for first-class passengers, Hannah exhaled in relief. Finally, she thought, ready to escape the crowded terminal. She strode confidently down the jet bridge, her head held high. Inside the cozy first-class cabin, Hannah took her seat at 3A, meticulously stowing her bags before pulling out her phone again. Moments later, a tall, broad-shouldered black man in a crisp army uniform stepped into the cabin. His name tag read E. Carter, and he carried himself with a quiet dignity that immediately commanded attention. As he approached, he nodded politely at Hannah and gestured to the seat beside her. Hannah's green eyes flickered with annoyance. She forced a tight smile but couldn't help the cascade of unspoken judgments flooding her mind. Why is he in first class? Is this some kind of free upgrade? I paid top dollar for my seat. Her thoughts betrayed a prejudice she had never fully acknowledged. As E. Carter settled into seat 3B, he nodded once more, a gesture of courtesy that Hannah ignored, turning toward the window instead. The tension in the air was palpable, setting the stage for an encounter that would challenge everything Hannah thought she knew about herself. Hannah Clark settled into her plush first-class seat, flipping through emails on her phone in a practiced display of indifference. Yet her attention drifted repeatedly toward E. Carter, the soldier now seated beside her. He exuded a calm and steady demeanor, but his presence seemed to trigger a quiet storm of irritation within her. Hannah couldn't help but glance at his crisp uniform, noting the polished insignias on his chest. Her thoughts swirled with assumptions. How does someone like him afford first class, she wondered. Is this some kind of courtesy upgrade for the military? Her internal dialogue sharpened as the flight attendant approached. "Good morning, Sergeant," the attendant said warmly to Carter. "Thank you for your service. Please let me know if there's anything you need during the flight." Carter nodded graciously. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, in a voice filled with quiet humility. Hannah's lips pressed into a thin line. Her frustration bubbled to the surface. "Humph," she thought to herself. "Of course, everyone bends over backward for the military. Meanwhile, I worked my way up to afford this seat. Is there anything you can do before you need to go?" When the attendant offered pre-departure beverages, Hannah opted for a mimosa, hoping the drink might ease her growing resentment. She glanced sideways as Carter declined the champagne and requested water instead. The flight continued with quiet exchanges. At one point, Carter discreetly pulled out a small photo from his jacket pocket. Hannah caught a glimpse, a smiling young girl with braided hair, holding a soccer ball. Unable to resist her curiosity, she broke the silence. "Is that your daughter?" she asked coolly, her tone carefully neutral but edged with judgment. Carter turned to her, a faint smile on his face. "Yes, ma'am, that's my daughter Eliza." Hannah almost rolled her eyes at the ma'am, a term she found unnecessarily formal. "She must be proud of you," she said, with a faintly sarcastic undertone. "Traveling home from duty, I assume?" Carter nodded. "I'm heading to Atlanta to see her," he said simply, not elaborating. Hannah's irritation grew. Something about his calm responses gnawed at her. She felt compelled to press further. Must be nice to get an upgrade to first class, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Carter's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but his voice remained steady. I paid for this seat myself, he replied. I'm not looking for handouts, ma'am. His firm but respectful tone caught her off guard, leaving her momentarily speechless, but she quickly masked her discomfort by retreating into her phone, slipping an earbud into her ear. As the flight progressed, the tension between them simmered. Hannah found herself glancing at Carter occasionally, each time feeling an inexplicable mixture of curiosity and resentment. She couldn't pinpoint why his presence unsettled her so much. Perhaps it was his quiet dignity, or maybe it was the way he seemed unfazed by her subtle hostility. Mid-flight, the attendants served lunch salmon or pasta, paired with a warm bread roll and a side salad. Hannah requested another glass of Chardonnay, using the alcohol as a buffer against her growing unease. When the attendant reached Carter, she once again thanked him for his service, offering him any beverage of his choice, complimentary. Carter declined the alcohol and quietly accepted the pasta dish. Hannah couldn't hold back any longer. She turned to him, her voice tinged with hostility. Don't you ever get tired of people fawning over you just because you wear a uniform? Carter paused mid-bite, setting down his fork. His brow furrowed slightly, but his tone remained measured. I appreciate the kindness, he said, but I don't ask for special treatment. Hannah scoffed. Really? Because it sure seems like everyone is bending over backward to make your life easier. Meanwhile, the rest of us work just as hard and don't get freebies or upgrades. Carter's eyes darkened briefly, but he took a steadying breath. Ma'am, he said, his voice calm but firm. If it bothers you that much, I can pay for my own meal. It's not a big deal. Her cheeks flushed, but she refused to back down. Followed was heavy. Carter glanced away, his expression unreadable. But Hannah caught a flicker of pain in his eyes. Despite herself, she felt a twinge of guilt. Yet she buried it under layers of rationalization. He probably has a sob story like everyone else. Life's tough for everyone, not just soldiers, she told herself. The plane continued its journey, but Hannah's mind raced. Her internal dialogue clashed with the faint pangs of empathy she tried desperately to ignore. She resolved to focus on her conference, pushing away the growing discomfort that lingered in Carter's quiet presence. The next morning, Hannah Clark sat in her hotel room, sipping coffee as she skimmed through her emails. The familiar rush of work urgency occupied her mind until a notification from her news app caught her attention. The headline read, Local Soldier's Daughter Fighting for Her Life. Community Rallies for Support. Curious, Hannah tapped the article, her casual interest quickly morphing into shock as the accompanying photo loaded. It was E. Carter, the soldier she had brushed off on the plane. Standing tall in his military uniform, he was pictured holding the hand of a young girl lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines and tubes. The girl's name was Eliza Carter, and the article detailed her battle with a severe congenital heart defect. Diagnosed just months earlier, her condition had rapidly worsened, and she now required a life-saving experimental surgery. The procedure was not fully covered by military insurance, leaving Carter to shoulder an overwhelming financial burden. Hannah felt a pang of discomfort as she read further. The community had started a modest fundraiser to help cover the cost of Eliza's care, but the total raised so far was only a fraction of what was needed. The article described how Carter had returned on emergency leave from his deployment overseas to be by his daughter's side, navigating the complexities of hospital bureaucracy while facing mounting bills. As Hannah scrolled through the photos accompanying the story, the one that struck her the most was a close-up of Eliza, bright-eyed and smiling, despite her frailty. She recognized the same hopeful face from the photograph Carter had been holding on the plane. The memory of her dismissive remarks hit her like a punch to the gut. Must be nice to get an upgrade to first class. Don't you ever get tired of people fawning over you? Her own words echoed in her mind, now dripping with the bitterness of hindsight. Hannah set her coffee cup down, her hand trembling slightly. She tried to rationalize her behavior. I didn't know. I couldn't have known. But the excuses felt hollow. The truth was, she hadn't cared enough to see beyond her assumptions. Her discomfort deepened as she reread the article, focusing on the financial struggle Carter faced. Despite his dedication to serving his country, he was now forced to rely on the goodwill of strangers to save his daughter's life. The idea unsettled her. Here was a man who had devoted himself to others, yet he was struggling, in a way she had never experienced. For the first time in years, Hannah felt her carefully curated sense of superiority waver. The armor of her privilege, built over decades of self-serving ambition, cracked just enough to let guilt seep in. She stared at the donation link in the article, her finger hovering over it. I can't change what I said, but maybe I can do something to help, she thought. Taking a deep breath, she clicked the link and typed in an amount that made her heart pound: $15,000. As the confirmation screen appeared, she stared at it, unsure if her gesture was enough to quiet the storm of remorse brewing within her. Hannah Clark stared at the fundraiser confirmation screen on her laptop, the bold letters thanking her for her $15,000 donation. Her hand hovered over the keyboard, her heart still racing from the impulsive decision. She had meant to close the article after reading it, to move on with her day and refocus on the high-stakes presentation she was preparing for the conference. But something about Eliza's story refused to let her go. The photo of the little girl's smiling face, despite the tubes and machines surrounding her, was seared into her mind. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the memory of her dismissive words to Eliza's father. Is this enough? She thought. The donation felt significant, even generous, but as Hannah sat back in her chair, she realized it was more an attempt to ease her guilt than to truly help. Money couldn't erase the hostility she had shown, or the prejudices she had harbored. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Hannah went through the motions at her conference, but her focus kept slipping. She replayed the brief interactions on the plane with Carter, the calm dignity in his voice, and the pain that flickered in his eyes. It gnawed at her. She couldn't undo her actions, but perhaps she could take another step to make things right. By evening, she had made up her mind. She found the hospital's address listed in the fundraiser details and decided to visit in person. She didn't fully understand why she felt compelled to go. It wasn't as if she had much to offer beyond her donation. But the idea of sitting idle, pretending the incident hadn't happened, felt unbearable. The next morning, Hannah drove to Peachtree Children's Hospital, her heart pounding as she navigated the sprawling medical campus. The bright murals of cartoon animals on the walls only amplified her anxiety. What would she say? Would Carter even want to see her? At the reception desk, she nervously asked for Eliza Carter's room. The nurse looked at her skeptically when she admitted she wasn't family, but after a quick call to Eliza's father, she was directed to room 312. When Hannah reached the room, she paused outside the door, peering through the glass window. Carter was inside, standing by Eliza's bedside. His broad shoulders were slumped, his hands resting gently on his daughter's small, frail hand. Eliza lay asleep, her chest rising and falling with the help of an oxygen tube. The sight made Hannah's chest tighten. Summoning her courage, she knocked softly on the doorframe. Carter turned, his face shifting from confusion to surprise. "Miss Clark?" he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Hannah stepped inside, suddenly unsure of herself. She clasped her hands tightly in front of her. I saw the news article about Eliza," she stammered. "I wanted to check on her, and on you." Carter's eyes narrowed slightly, his expression guarded. "I appreciate the thought," he said cautiously, "but I wasn't expecting to see you here." Hannah hesitated, searching for the right words. "I read about her condition, and about the fundraiser," she said softly. I donated." Carter studied her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Finally, he nodded. "Thank you. That means a lot." Eliza stirred in the bed, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked at Hannah, her face pale but curious. "Daddy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Who's that?" Carter leaned down, smoothing her hair. "This is Miss Clark," he said gently. She wanted to say hi. Hannah knelt beside the bed, her voice trembling as she introduced herself. "Hi, Eliza," she said, forcing a smile. "Your dad showed me a picture of you on the plane. You're just as beautiful in real life." Eliza managed a faint smile, her tiny fingers clutching a stuffed animal. "Thank you," she murmured. "Are you Daddy's friend?" Hannah's throat tightened, and she glanced at Carter, who met her gaze with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. "I hope so," she said finally. As Eliza drifted back to sleep, Hannah stood, her heart heavy with unspoken guilt. She turned to Carter. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly, "for how I acted on the plane. I was wrong about everything. I can't take back my words, but I want to help, however I can." Carter's expression softened slightly, though his voice remained measured. "It's not easy to admit when you're wrong," he said. "But Eliza doesn't need apologies. She needs people who care." Hannah nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and determination. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about herself or her career. She was thinking about how to make a real difference. Hannah Clark left the hospital that day feeling lighter, but far from absolved. Meeting Eliza Carter had shifted something inside her. The frail but resilient little girl had a spark that broke through the layers of prejudice and entitlement Hannah had unknowingly carried for years. The encounter also left her grappling with a new question. How could I truly make a difference? Over the following days, Hannah's involvement in Eliza's life deepened. It began with small steps, sharing the fundraiser link with her colleagues and friends, hoping to boost donations. Her corporate network, filled with professionals who admired her drive, responded generously. Within days, contributions had surged, bringing Eliza's family closer to their goal. Still, Hannah wasn't satisfied. She realized that money, while crucial, wasn't enough to address the challenges Eliza and her father faced. She reached out to Carter again, this time offering to help navigate the complexities of Eliza's care. "I'm good at organizing things," she explained hesitantly over the phone. "I can help with insurance paperwork, scheduling appointments, or whatever else you need." Carter was initially wary. "You don't owe us anything," he said, his tone cautious. "We've been managing so far." But Hannah persisted. "I want to do this," she insisted. "Not to make up for my mistakes, but because I care about Eliza. Let me help." Reluctantly, Carter agreed, and Hannah threw herself into the task with the same determination that had once driven her corporate success. She combed through insurance documents, identified coverage gaps, and made calls to hospital administrators and specialists. Her professional skills proved invaluable in cutting through red tape, and soon she had secured a consultation with one of the nation's top pediatric cardiac surgeons. Throughout this process, Hannah found herself spending more time at the hospital. What started as logistical support quickly became something more personal. She began bringing small gifts for Eliza, coloring books, storybooks, and plush toys. Sitting by Eliza's bedside, she would read to her or share silly stories from her own childhood, hoping to distract the little girl from her pain. Eliza responded with quiet enthusiasm, her shy smiles gradually becoming more frequent. "You're funny, Miss Hannah," she said one day, giggling at a story about a mischievous puppy. Hannah felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. It wasn't the fleeting satisfaction of closing a deal or earning praise from her boss. This was deeper, more fulfilling, a connection she hadn't realized she was missing. Meanwhile, her relationship with Carter also evolved. The initial tension between them gave way to mutual respect as Carter saw the sincerity behind Hannah's efforts. One evening, as they sat in the hospital cafeteria, Carter opened up about the struggles of being a single father in the military. "I thought I was prepared for anything," he admitted, staring into his coffee cup. "But when Eliza got sick, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath my feet." Hannah listened intently, her heart aching for him. "You've done so much for her," she said. "More than most people could manage. You shouldn't have to do it alone." Carter looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You've done more for us than I ever expected. Thank you." Hannah's self-awareness deepened as she spent more time with the Carters. She began reflecting on her own biases, the assumptions she had made about Carter on the plane, the resentment she had felt toward him, simply for existing in a space she thought was hers. Growing up in a wealthy, predominantly white neighborhood, Hannah had been surrounded by subtle but persistent messages about race and privilege. Her success, she had believed, was purely the result of hard work, while others who struggled must have lacked drive or ambition. Confronting these deeply ingrained beliefs was uncomfortable, but it was a discomfort Hannah welcomed. She started seeking out resources to better understand systemic racism and privilege. She read books, watched documentaries, and even attended a local workshop on implicit bias. The more she learned, the more she realized how much her worldview had been shaped by factors she had never questioned. At the same time, Hannah began to notice changes in herself. Her once relentless drive for corporate achievement started to feel hollow compared to the work she was doing for Eliza. Her priorities shifted, and she started using her influence to advocate for broader systemic changes. Within her company, she proposed a new initiative to provide grants for families in need of specialized medical care. Her colleagues, impressed by her newfound passion, rallied behind the idea. For the first time, Hannah felt that her career had a purpose beyond personal advancement. Her growing bond with Eliza also brought unexpected joy. One afternoon, as Eliza was regaining her strength, she proudly showed Hannah a drawing she had made. It was a picture of 3 stick figures, Eliza, her dad, and Hannah standing under a rainbow. "You're part of our team now," Eliza said, beaming. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," she said softly. The day of Eliza's surgery was a whirlwind of nerves and hope. Hannah stayed by Carter's side in the waiting room, offering quiet support as they anxiously awaited updates. When the surgeon finally emerged with good news, the relief was overwhelming. In the weeks that followed, as Eliza began her recovery, Hannah remained a constant presence. She helped Carter navigate follow-up appointments and brought Eliza small surprises to brighten her days. The bond they had formed was no longer one of obligation or guilt. It was built on genuine care and mutual respect. Hannah's transformation wasn't quick or easy. It required her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself and the world around her. But through her journey, she discovered a deeper sense of purpose and connection. She had once dismissed Carter as undeserving of his first-class seat, but now she saw him for what he truly was, a devoted father, a selfless soldier, and a man worthy of respect and compassion. And in helping Eliza, Hannah found a part of herself she didn't know she had lost, the ability to see beyond her own world and truly care for others. The day of Eliza Carter's surgery arrived on a crisp, sunny morning, but inside the hospital, the air was thick with tension. In the pediatric surgical ward, Eliza was prepped and ready, her small figure dwarfed by the oversized hospital bed. The room buzzed softly with the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the quiet murmur of medical staff reviewing final preparations. Hannah Clark stood at the edge of the room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She tried to project calm, but inside, her heart raced. Beside her, Sergeant Daniel Carter leaned down to Eliza, his voice soft but steady. "You're the bravest girl I know," he said, gently brushing her hair back. Eliza clutched a small teddy bear that Hannah had given her a gift. She had nicknamed Hope. Hannah stepped closer, her voice trembling but warm. "Eliza, when you're done, we're going to have so many more stories to read together," she said. Eliza's lips curled into a faint smile, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but filled with trust. When the surgical team arrived to wheel Eliza to the operating room, the gravity of the moment hit like a wave. Hannah watched as Carter knelt to kiss his daughter's forehead, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll be here the whole time, sweetheart." As the team guided Eliza through the double doors, Hannah and Carter were left standing in the hallway. The doors closed with a soft click, and the reality of the hours ahead settled over them. In the waiting room, time crawled. Hannah and Carter sat in uneasy silence, joined occasionally by a nurse updating them on the surgery's progress. Carter clasped and unclasped his hands, his eyes fixed on the floor. Hannah paced, unable to sit still. "Does it feel like the world is holding its breath?" Hannah murmured, her voice barely audible. Carter glanced up, offering a faint, strained smile. "Because it is." The hours stretched endlessly, each minute feeling heavier than the last. Hannah found herself silently praying something she hadn't done in years. She prayed for Eliza, for the doctors, and for a miracle. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the surgeon entered the room. His scrubs were stained, his face lined with fatigue, but his expression was one of relief. Sarah gazed at the hospital. "The procedure went well," he announced. "We repaired the defect and Eliza is stable. She'll need close monitoring in the coming days, but the prognosis is optimistic." The words hit like a flood of light in the darkness. Carter buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with quiet sobs of gratitude. Hannah stood frozen for a moment, tears streaming down her face. Then, unable to hold back, she reached out and placed a comforting hand on Carter's shoulder. "She made it," she whispered. Carter looked up, his eyes wet but filled with hope. "She made it," he echoed, his voice breaking. In the recovery room, Eliza lay surrounded by monitors and IV lines, her small chest rising and falling steadily. Carter and Hannah stood by her bedside, each overwhelmed by a mixture of relief and awe. "Please show strong," Hannah said softly, brushing a strand of Eliza's hair from her face. Carter nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "She gets it from her mom," he said, glancing at the necklace around his neck, a simple gold chain holding his late wife's wedding ring. "And maybe just a little from me." Hannah smiled, the bond between them deepening in the shared moment of relief. In the days that followed, Hannah's role became even more crucial. She helped coordinate follow-up care, rallying her network to ensure Eliza had access to the best specialists. Her corporate connections came through once more, funding additional medical equipment and support for Eliza's recovery. Hannah also continued her personal support, bringing meals to the hospital for Carter and sharing moments of levity with Eliza. She used her knack for organization to streamline insurance claims and manage the overwhelming paperwork, allowing Carter to focus solely on his daughter. The ripple effect of Hannah's involvement extended far beyond the hospital walls. Her efforts had drawn national attention to the systemic issues surrounding medical care for military families. Donations to Eliza's fundraiser soared, and advocacy groups began using her story as a rallying cry for change. For Hannah, the experience was transformative. The woman who had once dismissed Carter on a plane now stood beside him, not as a benefactor, but as a true ally. Her actions weren't driven by guilt anymore, they were fueled by compassion and a genuine desire to help. One evening, as Eliza rested peacefully in her hospital bed, Carter turned to Hannah. "I can't thank you enough for what you've done," he said, his voice low but earnest. "You didn't have to do any of this." Hannah met his gaze, her own eyes glistening. "I didn't have to, but I wanted to," she replied. "You and Eliza have shown me what really matters. I'm just grateful to be part of your story." As Carter nodded, a smile broke across his face, a rare moment of unguarded warmth. Together they stood in the quiet hospital room, united by a shared purpose and an unspoken promise to continue fighting for Eliza's future. In the weeks following Eliza's successful surgery, Hannah Clark's world looked entirely different. The corporate executive who had once measured success in promotions and profit margins now found fulfillment in a deeper, more meaningful purpose. Spending time with Eliza and Daniel had ignited a passion for systemic change that Hannah couldn't ignore. Her first step was using her influence within her company to launch a corporate philanthropy program focused on supporting military families with unmet medical needs. She presented a detailed proposal to her executive team, citing Eliza's story as a powerful example of the gaps in healthcare coverage. "This isn't just about doing the right thing," Hannah explained during her pitch. "It's about creating tangible solutions for families who give so much, yet face unimaginable hurdles." The program was approved, and Hannah was placed in charge. Through partnerships with nonprofits and medical institutions, the initiative began providing grants and resources for families in need, helping to bridge the gaps that had once threatened Eliza's life. But Hannah's commitment didn't stop there. She began advocating for policy changes, leveraging her growing network to raise awareness about the challenges military families faced. She attended fundraisers, spoke at events, and even connected with lawmakers to push for reforms in military healthcare coverage. Amid this whirlwind of advocacy and action, Hannah's bond with Daniel and Eliza deepened. What had started as a quest for redemption became something more, a connection that felt like family. Hannah spent weekends with the Carters, often bringing dinner to their modest home or joining them for outings when Eliza was well enough. One sunny afternoon, they visited a nearby park. Eliza, still recovering but gaining strength, ran short distances before collapsing into laughter on the grass. Daniel watched her, his expression soft and full of pride. "She's a fighter," he said, turning to Hannah, "just like her mom was." Hannah smiled, touched by his openness. "She gets it from you too," she said. "You've been her rock through all of this." Daniel's gaze lingered on Hannah for a moment. "You've been a rock for both of us," he said quietly. "I can't imagine getting through this without you." Later that evening, as Eliza cuddled beside Hannah with a storybook, the little girl looked up with a serious expression. "Ms. Hannah," she said, "do you think you'll still visit me when I'm all better?" Hannah's throat tightened and she hugged Eliza gently. "Of course I will," she said. "You're stuck with me now." The three of them, Hannah, Daniel, and Eliza, had become an unconventional family, bound not by blood but by love, respect, and shared determination. In helping Eliza heal, Hannah had found a purpose greater than herself. And in the process, she discovered a version of herself she never knew existed. Compassionate, driven, and wholeheartedly human. Hannah Clark's journey is a powerful reminder that prejudice, no matter how deeply rooted, can be overcome with empathy and action. What began as a chance encounter filled with assumptions and hostility became a life-altering experience for everyone involved. Through her growing bond with Daniel and Eliza, Hannah learned the value of looking beyond surface judgments to see the humanity in others. Her transformation didn't happen overnight. It required humility, self-reflection, and the courage to make amends. But Hannah's willingness to step outside her comfort zone created a ripple effect that extended far beyond one family. Her advocacy for systemic change, her corporate philanthropy initiatives, and her unyielding support for Eliza showed how a single act of compassion can inspire broader impact. This story is a testament to the power of redemption. It shows that even the harshest mistakes can be a catalyst for growth if we choose to confront them with honesty and a willingness to change. In the end, Hannah's actions helped save a life, heal a family, and reshape her own perspective. And as she walked this new path, she proved that empathy and humanity are forces strong enough to transform not just one person, but the world around them.